So you have something like Catherine Schultz's book on being wrong here. And there's also a bit of a truism in business culture, this idea like failing fast and so on. And you even have writers like Samuel Beckett declaring the importance of failure. But I think that there's something that's not kind of quite right about this. I don't think it's quite true. So let me read just from the beginning of the book to explain how I kind of set this up. So it starts like this. To begin with a confession, I'm a sore loser. Something in me demands that I win, beat, or complete every game I try. And that part of me is outraged and tormented whenever I fail to do so. Still, I play video games, though I know I will fail at least part of the time. On a higher level, I think I enjoy playing video games, but why does this enjoyment contain at its core something that I most certainly do not enjoy? And I was playing Patapong, and things were going well, but when I came to the desert, my tactics began to fail. I repeated the trusted triangle, triangle, square, circle sequence of button pushes, but my warriors continued to burn to death in the sun. I failed the level. I tried again. I could not glean from the game if my timing was off, if I was using the wrong sequence, or if something completely different was wrong. I put the game away. I returned to it. I put it away again. I did not feel too good about myself. I dislike failing, sometimes to the extent that I will refuse to play, but mostly I will return, submitting myself to a series of unhappy failures, once again seeking out a feeling that I deeply dread. So, in a way, I've come to think that video games are really fundamentally about failing, not about winning, and I explain what this means. So games are about failure because it is failure that connects us to a game. It's failure that makes us realize that we are flawed. It's failure that makes us put in effort in order to escape it. So failure is profound. It's a kind of moment of truth. It's a moment that makes us think. It's also this moment where we have to reorient ourselves because we have to realize that what we were doing wasn't quite right. And so, of course, it's with some trepidation that I have to admit to my failures in a game like Patapong. But fortunately, I can share another story that puts my skills in a better light. So this is a game called Meteors that I've been looking forward to for a very long time. So when I got the game, I unwrapped it quickly and started playing it in the main game mode. And then in a feat of gamesmanship, I think, I played the game to completion on my very first attempt without failing even once. And naturally, this made me very, very angry. So I put the game away, and I didn't touch it again for more than a year. And so funnily enough, I haven't been able to repeat this first performance ever. It was just this kind of moment, right? And already here, I think you have something about what's interesting in games, right? This fact that, say, if you're learning to drive a car, you don't necessarily get disappointed if you fail the test. So there is something apparently different in games. And I discuss it as a kind of paradox. And you can state it like this. So in general, we try to succeed and to avoid failure, but we experience failure when we play games. And so it seems we seek out games, although we will experience something that we normally try to avoid. There are many ways of explaining this contradiction, and I'm sure many of you have ideas for it. I'll discuss many kind of possibilities of it. But I think it's safe to say that humans prefer to feel competent. And it's kind of strange that game players choose to engage in something where they're almost certain to fail and feel incompetent at least part of the time. So game developers will often talk about something like balancing and say that a game should be neither too easy nor too hard. Unfortunately, this doesn't quite explain the paradox either. It simply demonstrates that I think we generally are aware of its existence. But failure is a bit of a rabbit hole, so let's go down that rabbit hole of failure. I do think there's a kind of dark beauty inside games. So games, I think, have an element of pleasure spiked with pain. And this is what makes games different from other designed things, right? So the designer of a car, a computer program, or a household appliance are kind of obliged to make sure that you find the designs easy to use. So the designer is supposed to help you prevent oncoming traffic, or not delete important files, or not trick you into selecting the wrong temperature for a wash. And so, of course, this button is hardly a game, right? For a game, we obviously expect that the designers have spent energy making sure that we fail. Similarly, when we play games with other people, we tend to we do something slightly strange, right? We tend to expect that our friends and family will help us achieve our goals. But if we play a competitive game with them, we kind of expect them to engage in conflicts with us to prevent us from achieving our goals. So it seems that games give us a kind of license to prevent others from achieving their goals when we would normally help them. So in a game, a number of actions that we would regularly find awkward or rude seem to be recast as pleasant and sociable. This extends to single player, right? So consider if you're stuck in a game like Portal 2, a puzzle game like this. I think when we're stuck, we have this feeling that we're lacking and inadequate, and the longer we're stuck, the more lacking and inadequate we may feel. But of course, the game also promises us that we can probably remedy the problem if we keep playing. Before playing a game in this Portal series, we probably didn't consider that we might be people who had problems solving like warp-based spatial puzzles. So because we'd never seen puzzles like this before. And so you can say, in a way, this is what games do, right? They promise us that we can repair a kind of personal inadequacy, but it's an inadequacy that they create in the first place. This also shows you something about how games are different from other art forms, right? So if you read a detective story and you get to the very end, you might kind of still believe that somehow, even if you didn't exactly spell it out, you had really figured out all along who did it. And the thing with stories is that they're quite polite, right? So they won't challenge you on that. So they won't say, well, really, you didn't figure it out. You can kind of still have that belief. Games, in a way, are much more honest, right? They call up bluff and let us know that we have failed. So you can say that where novels or movies or stories in general concern the limitations and self-doubt of others, games are special in that they concern our self-doubts and limitations and inadequacies. And I think this is something we often want to hide, but the thing is that this is often kind of easily understood by other players or by people who look at us. It's also complicated and special in many different ways. It's so weird that there are books that exist to explain this problem to children. So this is from the book Liam Wins the Game, Sometimes. And it was created to teach children how to deal with winning and losing. And the author tells the child that it's acceptable to feel disappointed when losing, but unacceptable to throw a tantrum because it is being a poor loser and it spoils the whole game. Others do not like playing with poor losers, right? So I think the thing is that we kind of dance around this, right? We don't always do what our parents tell us, and not even as adults or as parents, I guess. I don't know if you remember, but in the 2010 World Cup, there was this kind of moment where the US team was actually doing pretty well. And I got the sense that a lot of people were kind of thinking, yeah, soccer is actually kind of interesting sport, right? Yeah. And then the US got kicked out by Ghana, as I recall. And the New York Post had this kind of headline, "This sport is stupid anyway." Yeah. And you can say, in a way, this is something about failure, right? We have ways of denying that we care about failure. So we can dismiss a game as poorly made or even stupid. But I think we also understand this to be a type of defense that's so childish that we can only use it kind of half-jokingly, as in this headline. So when I thought about it, I realized, in a way, this kind of question is part of a kind of much longer history, a very long, a very old kind of aesthetic question, which is what you would call the paradox of painful art, right? So it seems in general we try to avoid situations where we experience painful emotions, but there's many kinds of art, such as, say, like horror or tragedy in general, that we have painful reactions to. And so it seems kind of odd that people seek out art that we know we will have painful emotions in reaction to. And this is kind of a very general paradox that has been going on for like several thousand years. It's often referred to as the paradox of tragedy, as there's several books with that title. And I think when you talk to people, people often have this kind of explanation with reference to catharsis, a term by Aristotle. And this is kind of argument saying that in general we may feel like fear or sadness and so on, but then if we witness these kind of things in fictional setting, such like a theater play, these emotions will be purged from us and we'll come out clean in a sense. I don't think this is true for games, at least. So if we experience a humiliating defeat, we really are filled with emotions of humiliation and inadequacy. So games don't really purge these emotions from us. They produce them in the first place. And of course, also remember that the paradox is not simply that games or tragedies contain something unpleasant in them, but that the weird thing is that we seem to want it to be there, even if we also seem to dislike it. So, for example, if you go to a theme park, there may be very long queues, but you would actually generally prefer that the queues weren't there. But tragedy and things like failure in games seems to be things that we actually do want to have there. And so there's Aaron Smuts, a philosopher, has an overview of these kind of various historical answers to that question. So he says there are really three types of answers. Like the first answer is deflation, saying that it may seem that we are sad when watching a play, and in this case playing a game, but it's actually not actual pain or actual sadness. It's a kind of fictional sadness. Or when you are inside, when it's in an artwork, it doesn't have the weight that it has in real life. The second answer is a kind of compensation argument, saying that, well, it is actually painful, but you do get something kind of positive out of it. And the third answer is that what you can call the non-hedonic answer, which is a bit more special, which says that we don't necessarily mind pain in the first place. And so we can map this to games. So deflation, art pain is not actually painful. That would be, it's just a game, right? So I lost, but given that it's just a game, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have any emotional weight. The second one, compensation, is more like this idea that failure is a necessary evil for participating, like in the children's book. And the third one is more like if you think of the idea of the athlete that has a very like year-long or decade-long training regimen in order to like win and compete in some competition. We kind of accept this idea that this may contain kind of actual genuine pain. So it's kind of a very long process that is actually kind of genuinely painful. And you can think of it, if you think of it in terms of games, then the question is like this: what does it mean to fail in a game? Is it harmless because it's just a game? Is it a price we are willing to pay in order to play, or perhaps in order to reach success? Or is it normal, just like failing in real life? And the answer is, well, let me give you another example first. So a few years ago, I bought a new cell phone that came with a game called Super Real Tennis. And this was like a very simple little tennis game that gave me many headaches. And the reason was this, that every time I played the game, no matter how far I progressed, I always got this message here: please check the basic operation methods and techniques and how to play. And this was more like, move the stick left to move left, press the button to hit the ball. And I was like, it was kind of very frustrating, and I kept returning to these instructions to make sure that I hadn't missed anything. And why did the game keep telling me to read the basic instructions? Like, was I that bad a player? Were there other advanced instruction screens that the game would show to smarter players? I was kind of rationally convinced that this was an oversight from the designers, but I could not escape a kind of series of self-doubts due to this small free tennis game on my cell phone. There's something called attribution theory in psychology. I think this explains why it feels bad. So it has to do with every time something happens, or if you fail, you attribute that event to a specific cause or a combination of causes. So, for example, if you play a game, it might be, well, I failed because I was bad, or I didn't do well, or I failed because it's a stupid game, something's wrong with the game is rigged in some way, or it might be some kind of external circumstance, so like it's a bad controller, or I was unlucky, or any kind of combination of these. And of course, when the problem with this, like check the basic operation methods, was in a way that it was saying it was my fault, and also in a way by always showing me the basic instructions, it was saying that I wasn't really improving, right? And it was also seemed to say that there was something wrong with me, given that it seemed logical that it would be giving other more advanced instruction screens to better players. And so this is kind of a way of talking about where you locate failure. I also clearly wasn't playing optimally when I was playing Super Real Tennis. And this is kind of easy trap to fall into. So you can read a lot of kind of sports coaching literature, and so they often tell us something like, replace frustration with curiosity when you perform poorly. So failure should be seen as a learning opportunity, etc. And this, I think, is this kind of weird paradox of failure again. So it's telling us that we should have we should care enough about success to put in effort, but we should see learning rather than winning as the ultimate goal. So in a way, in order to win, we should pretend that we're not playing to win, right? And this is also very common for like top athletes to make some kind of proclamation about their love for the game. So this is an interview with chess grandmaster Magnus Carlsen, who says, "I've never been into setting myself these goals. I mean, just playing the game has been enough for me." And I mean, I do think this is a kind of ideal. This is not how people necessarily behave most of the time. And I also think that top athletes deliberately play up to this to become across as these kind of noble sports people. Of course, it's kind of wrong for me to blame the game when I play a game like Super Real Tennis. You should take responsibility for your actions. And so I think this is another aspect of the paradox of failure. This was a game prototype I made some years ago in collaboration with Game Lab, and had a lot of people play through the game, and then I asked them to rate the game and also to explain why they failed. And one of the things that became clear was that players gave the game a higher rating if they felt responsible for failure versus if they felt they were just unlucky or something else had happened. And so you can see this is, again, an aspect of this paradox that in order to feel in order to like the game, it seems you have to go through this kind of patch of pain, of this patch of accepting the responsibility for your own inadequacy. Otherwise, you're going to like the game less. And you can say this in a way is the kind of the fractal nature of our reaction to games. I think in the big perspective, games appear to take outside a lot of regular norms. So I stated that games give us a license to kind of thwart the intentions of other people or prevent them from reaching their goals. But I was reading from a strategy guide to this board game Carcassonne. It actually warns us that it's frowned upon to place a piece that directly prevents another player from completing a city or a road. So of course, from a kind of mathematical point of view, there really is no difference, right? So if you gain a point, it's exactly the same as your opponent not getting a point. It's exactly the same thing, right? But at least this strategy guide writer felt that even though, of course, it's perfectly allowable when you play a game to kind of prevent other people from reaching their goals, there were still certain kind of actions that were like out of bounds or still too confrontational. I personally don't share this view at all. Actually, I do perhaps because I have a bit of a mathematical approach to it, but I've also played with people who felt this was kind of very disturbing to experience. But I think it goes to show that we're in a kind of aspect of game playing that's where we're kind of a little uncertain where things stand or what things actually mean. So what failure does, I also think it becomes even more clearly visible when it's absent. So it's not that you can't grow or improve your skills without failure, but failure is often something that pushes us towards personal improvement. And players actually often need to be pushed because players are actually often fundamentally quite lazy. So designer Soren Johnson of the Civilization series talks about this problem that players seek out an optimal path and stick to it even if they don't like being on that path. So this is a Civilization example where there's a strategy called lumberjacking where you could keep planting trees over and over and again to generate resources. Players really didn't like doing that, but they did it because it was the optimal path. So you can see this is also a bit strange again, right? So it seems that when we play a game, we are accepting a kind of challenge that we don't have to accept. Right? We're taking on some unnecessary work. But then it seems like once we start playing, we suddenly become extremely lazy. And we'll just go for the kind of super optimal path through the game. So it seems there is a distinction between like the decision to engage in a challenging activity and the way we're behaving inside that activity. I think especially for single-player games like these. And of course, then you can say that the task of a game designer, of course, is to balance this to make sure that the path of least resistance is also the most interesting one. But it is a kind of strange fact how players seem to be lazy. So I think we are kind of strange in this way. So when I was playing Patapong, I searched for a solution online to this problem. And it turned out that there were lots and lots of hits of people like not understanding how they're supposed to get through the desert level. And it's kind of clear if I'd been paying attention to some small piece of text at an earlier stage, I had figured out, etc. Right. But I used the fact that many players had experienced the same problem as an argument for attributing the failure to a flaw in the game design rather than with my skills. So we tend to say that we are a self-serving species, so we're more likely to deny responsibility when we fail than when we succeed. So this has a technical term, it's called motivational bias. It's also captured in the phrase that success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. That's another way of saying it. So of course, the times I stopped playing Patapong, I precluded the possibility of actually getting through the desert and completing the game. So I was actually acting in a self-defeating way. By refusing to put in effort in order to progress in the game, I was actually shielding myself from future failures. And so you can say the obvious response to failure is always to practice harder, but we don't always do that. So especially in education, this has been discussed a lot. So it's quite well documented that students who are about to take a test sometimes, stay up late, consume alcohol even, or just procrastinate and don't study. And the point of doing this, of course, is that if you fail the test, then, well, it's not really that there was something wrong with you. I was just like, well, I was hungover, I hadn't slept, or I hadn't really studied, so, So this is a common way, and also a kind of paradoxical way we sometimes approach failure, right? That in order to protect ourselves from it, in a way we seek it out, but we seek it out in a way where it just feels less personal. So we can kind of get to this kind of sum up. You can say that, in a way, you can say what game failure has is what you could call plausible deniability. So I don't think it's that, like I was listing these different kind of explanations to the paradox of tragedy. So it's not that any of them is the right one. It's just rather that you can say in a way that what games allow us to do is to deny that failure was important to us. So the idea of plausible deniability is something I first heard from Steven Pinker. So originally this is this idea that if Frank has a nice iPhone 5, for example, it would be a shame if something were to happen to it, right? Right? Yeah. So this is classic, like kind of film mobster threat. But of course, there's this deniability inherent in it, right? You can say, well, I was just complimenting Frank on his new iPhone 5, right? And I do think the same thing is the case with games. So even however like upset you may seem, you can still have, well, it's just a game, or you can have this explanation that it's not fair, or you can explain that in a way your identity doesn't line up with the game. It's not important for you as a person to be good at this game. You don't care. And of course, then you can just say you weren't really trying, or again, like you were hungover, or you'd never played it before, or etc. So in a way, this also explains some of why game failure is different from failure in the regular world, right? Because if you have a manager who has, if not gamified your workplace, but at least set up this elaborate point system, and you're not scoring very highly, you can't just say you don't care about the point system because you will be fired. And of course, when you play a game, you have this way out. You say, well, it's kind of artificial measure of my skills. It doesn't really matter. And so you say this is a feature, not a bug. And so you say that there's no fixed meaning of game failure. And you can also say that in a way where this paradox of tragedy that I was referring to is something that professional philosophers are really into. You can say that I think the question of failure means is something that we all discuss all the time. In a sense, we're all philosophers when we play games. So all these ideas of sportsmanship or sportspersonship is also a philosophy of failure. Or if you say it's just a game, it's a philosophy of failure. Or if you're a spoiled sport, or if you're a sore loser, it's a philosophy of failure, saying that, well, there's nothing particular special about game failure. It's just your regular old failure. And also, you can also see that how there's something kind of fractal to this character of failure in games, right? That it appears that we treat games somehow differently than regular activities, and then it still seems to reappear, right? It still seems that we accept confrontation when we play a game with other people, and then even within that, there's still kind of variations where suddenly you have the whole kind of being polite to other people appearing again. And likewise, it seems that we like to seek out challenge when we play games, but then suddenly sometimes we're like really, really lazy. But what does failure do? I think failure forces us to reconsider what we're doing. It connects us to the events in the game. It proves that we matter, that the world doesn't simply continue regardless of our actions. What failure means, well, I think a tempting solution could be to say that it's really subjective. But I think that kind of overplays it, right? Perhaps we would like failure to be what we make of it, but it's not really necessarily within our power. So the thing with the paradox of failure, like the paradox of tragedy and this paradox of painful art, it's not really, these aren't kind of universal licenses, right? There'll still be tragedies that we don't want to witness. There'll still be horror movies we don't want to watch. And there'll still be games that we don't want to play with our siblings or our rivals or our bosses or ourselves because we're too afraid of failure. And this actually sort of seems to be the case. You can even find the history of games, even top players who fail that test. So, for example, this is after winning the World Championship over Spassky in 1972, Bobby Fischer began making a series of increasingly unreasonable demands for future matches, and he eventually lost the title for that reason. And so Gary Kasparov believes that it's because the always meticulously prepared Fischer was so afraid of failing that he preferred not to play. And so I think in a way I would like to remove from the English language the phrase "it's just a game" because it pretends that failure is neutral as long as it happens in a game. But I think ironically this is also something that would be wrong to do in a way because it's a kind of faulty claim that gives us the chance to shrug our shoulders while we're fuming inside. So you say it gives us a kind of freedom to count our successes and downplay our failures, even to ourselves. And so I think this is a kind of elusive space of games that we need to protect, as long as it comes with this little additional license for us to be just a little angry and more than a little frustrated whenever we fail. And so I think this is how games are fundamentally the art form of failure. So it's the art form that deals with failure, other people's failures, and most importantly, with our own failures. And that's it. All right, so... And so next I will have Doug come to the forefront here. And so so
it's just those two videos. Oh, it's just this folder here.
Sorry?
It's just this folder here.
Yeah.
Got it. Hi everyone. I'm Doug. So I've been for a few years now thinking a lot about these issues of, of course, failure, and then for me specifically, player abuse, and really kind of like adversarial designing for failure even. And in fact, last year I just finished a PhD on this very subject, so I've really been kind of in this headspace and thinking about this issue a lot. Of course, I have 10 minutes now, so I want to give you like a really kind of small slice of some of these issues that I've been thinking a lot about. Specifically, I'm totally obsessed with this game, or mod, more accurately, called Kaizo Mario, which is a Japanese fan mod of a very famous Super Nintendo game, Super Mario World. And it's also been kind of nicknamed Asshole Mario, although that's not a direct translation of Kaizo. And you're about to kind of see why it has this nickname. So let me just show you a video. Okay, let me put the volume down a little bit. I have to scrub them to the right places. Okay, yep, yeah, it's coming. So I do Windows. No, I have to go to play.
you just press space.
Talk about failure. No. No.
Can you just, I think it's easy just to tap to it. And then
I have to put the volume. So can I pause it?
I think it's just space.
Yes. Oh. Of course. There we go. Well, okay. Right, so he immediately dies. Right, you saw that in the level, which is not typical for a video game, right? Usually a video game starts off easy and gets harder. So like off the bat, something's kind of going wrong here, right? So, okay, he finally realizes that he immediately has to kind of jump and get over this bullet. So he's trying to figure out what to do. Okay, he dies. Take 3. Okay, so this is really interesting. So the story behind this game is that this is, and it's hard to verify any of this information, but the story goes that this is some guy made it for his friend who was super great at Super Mario. Like his friend is some Super Mario World prodigy, and now he's going to make these like insane Super Mario World levels to test him. And so this is kind of like a message. I forget the direct translation. I don't read Japanese. This is kind of like a message, almost taunting this friend. So what's really interesting about this piece is that it's actually literally kind of like something designed for a particular person. So almost this designer daring his friend with this game. So anyway, okay, he's going to read this message. You probably see that arrow of coins. He's trying to figure out what to do. Oh, he gets it. 1, 2, 2. And so that is the easiest part by far of the easiest level in this game. Let me just give you. I want to give you another example really quickly. Okay. It should be. Okay. So this is like the 7th level. This is like way into the game. And what's amazing about these videos is that it's actually, if you believe the story, it's actually the guy who is playing edited together in sequence. Like, and I mean, he edited it way down, but he's showing you as he like slowly kind of figures out and like slowly inches his way through the level. But there's a ton of failure along the way. And I think the best parts of these videos is when he does these death montages, right? So. Right, and you see him, the same jump again that he's, okay, then it kind of keeps going. But it's amazing watching, each of these videos is about like 15 minutes long, and then in the middle of the video, it'll just like break out into another death montage. And you just get this sense of like, oh my God, this person has played this level like thousands of times. And you like really feel this like narrative of him, failing this challenge. It's the last piece of video I want to show you really quickly. So we're about to see some triumph, finally. No. Okay, so this is level 6. So this guy's been playing this for hours, right? And he's already gone through like all these traps of this maniacal designer. There's lava underwater, I don't know why. Okay, watch this. Right, so there's this amazing moment where he's like, something's like a little too quiet here. Like something's wrong. And you can hear his thoughts, like, right? And so this is amazing. And so the guy who's playing this is good enough to realize, 1, what's coming, because he knows the designer now, and 2, he realizes, without ever having to see the trap, how to get around this trap. So there's this weird quirk in Super Mario World where you can go under a thing, and right, lo and behold, a bullet goes through. Let's go back to the, how do I? Okay. And so what's amazing about this is, okay, so if he had failed, it wouldn't have been such a big deal, because whatever, the save point was there, like literally right there, and he would have known, and he would have lost maximum 2 minutes doing this. But there's this amazing moral victory, which is when you're watching these videos, you're like, yes, he finally stuck it to the designer, like he saw it coming, and you really like feel this joyful like moral victory here. And what's so fascinating to me is if you watch the, if you read the YouTube comments, so these are all sourced from YouTube, and they have millions of views, so there's like thousands of YouTube comments, right? And what's so interesting to me is how the language shifts when you read people talk about this game. So here's a comment. The player pwned the creator so bad when he knew something was up at that killer plant hallway. finally the player is one step ahead of the designer. So it's really interesting, instead of saying, wow, that was a really hard level, or he did a really good job at that level, suddenly there's this language shift where spectators are now thinking about this game as a match between player and designer. And that, to me, that language shift is so indicative of a mental shift about how both the player, but even us as spectators, are viewing the competition that's going on here. I'll step you through a few other things, but I'm already running out of time. There's a game design textbook here by Ernst Adams and Andrew Rollings, and they write, a few designers thinks it's funny to taunt or insult the player for losing. This is mean-spirited and violates a central principle of player-centric game design, the duty to empathize. The player will feel bad about losing anyway. Don't make it worse. And like, I think there's something like really kind of lamely conservative about that. I mean, like, with all due respect to Ernst and Andrew, and also just kind of wrong, right? Because there's something like deeply funny, like even watching those kind of death montages. That's like also kind of deeply enjoyable, but you're even frustrated on the half. Like it's kind of excruciating watching these videos, but also hilarious. So it's much more complicated than like being mean-spirited. There's this really fascinating and hilarious and tragic and frustrating mix of kind of emotions going on. So basically the main point I want to make here is that, often in terms of like player-centric design, which you heard mentioned in that textbook excerpt, you think of a player interacts with the game system, and that's really the main thing. And okay, yes, that's kind of set up or mediated by a designer, but it's really that interaction between the player and the game system that we should be focusing on as designers. You yourself as a player-centric designer aren't the important thing. It's setting up this nice experience that the player will have with the game system. What I think is oh, that didn't work. Oh, it did work. What I think is so interesting about there's this shift, there's this flip, where suddenly, and it's kind of hard to explain why, we're suddenly thinking about this as a rivalry between the player and the designer. And in fact, that's how we start viewing that stage underwater when he kind of triumphs over the designer as the contest rather than the player against the level. It's now the player against this maniacal designer. There's lots of examples of this. Obviously, Kaizo Mario isn't the only example. I'm going to skip through some. Old text adventure games were, infamous for this. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a really great example. I Want to Be the Guy is another kind of really hardcore platformer that has subverts expectations. Just to reference one of my own games, here's a motion control game we made that literally was trying to embarrass the player in public. But even, I think in other media as well, just to throw out some names really quickly, I think Agatha Christie had a similar dynamic in terms of novels. You think of the performance art pieces of Marina Abramovich. And the point I want to make is that there's kind of a rich history of this. It's not, obviously Kaizo Mario. But to end on just a quick quote, and I really like this quote, and it's been pretty inspiring to me in terms of the design work I do, is thinking about what Dave Hickey, who's an art critic writing about art and democracy, talks about game rules and how certain types of game rules can transform what he calls the pain of violent conflict into the pleasures of disputation, which I think is a really nice evocative phrase, into the excitements of politics, the delights of rhetoric, art, and competitive sport. Now, obviously, this is true of any kind of competitive sport in a way. Basketball, okay, there's the pleasures of disputation, there's competition, you have adversaries. But what I'm really interested in here is, in this phrase, really kind of savoring these pleasures of disputation and kind of reveling in them. And I think that's, to me, what's really inspiring, as a designer, thinking about Kaizo Mario. So anyway, that's my little shtick on my obsession with Kaizo Mario. I super, super highly recommend you YouTube. Asshole Mario is what you YouTube for. They're amazing. But that's...
Thanks, Sebastian.
So I have just a couple of brief remarks before we continue, and I just give them from here. One of the things that I really like about your books, Jesper, is the way that you take a topic that we think we already know about, and you kind of show that it's more complex. So you take something that maybe seems simple, whether it's the status of casual games, that they're easier and more forgiving, or the way that you kind of like opened up the relationship of gameplay to narrative in Half Real. And I have read about a third of this book so far. And I'm going to make the bold claim that I think it's your best book ever. I'm plugging it now hard, but I really do think it's great. And it does exactly that, right? It takes this topic, which hasn't gotten a lot of thought, and really kind of opens it up. And maybe part of I think it's extremely well written and entertaining and full of insight. But I think one of the reasons I like it so much is because I really, really like the topic. It was years ago that I decided that I was really interested in failure and mistakes. I was trying to figure out, how does one get to be smart? And I thought, well, you can read smart people and try to copy them. But then I had what I thought was a clever idea, which is like, let me try to study what it means to be not smart, right? To make mistakes in your thinking and your thought, and that might give me some insight. So I got really interested in reading about that. For example, reading Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, who developed the sort of groundbreaking work in behavioral psychology, talking about our cognitive biases, like these sort of habits of thought that all humans tend to have, which are these common errors in rational thinking that we make over and over again. But also reading people like the investor Charlie Munger, who has a wonderful piece about mistakes that he's noticed through a lifetime of business and investing, the mistakes that people make in thinking. Even people like the Australian philosopher David Stove, who has a wonderful piece called What is Wrong with Our Thoughts, a sort of neo-positivist credo, where he really looks at the whole history of philosophy as just a morass of complete gobbledygook and mistakes and errors, and people like that, and so it's always been something that I'm really fascinated with, and games, of course, are a wonderful opportunity to study mistakes and study errors. I think really that games are a laboratory for failure, right? Because they give you an opportunity to see it up close, to really highlight it in your own thinking and your own behavior. We are immersed in failure all the time. We're constantly making mistakes, but we kind of don't see them, right? We're kind of a little bit blind to them. And I think one of the things that games do is give you an opportunity to just zoom in on your own mistakes over and over again, and to in a way give them some precision and clarity, to make you aware of them, and in a way that you're not normally aware of them. It's a strange form of suffering, and it's a strange form of pleasure, as you kind of highlight in your book. I think one example is I have a wonderful son by the name of James, and grew up playing games with him. At one point, I taught him one of my favorite games, which is the game of Go, the Asian strategy games played with black and white stones. And this is a game that I've been playing for many years, probably 15, 20 years by the time I taught it to him. And we would play it, and I would win, and we would play it, and I would win, and it was just this ritual that we had, and he just slowly got better and better at the game of Go, and I just stayed the same. And then eventually we got to a point where one evening he beat me. He beat me at this game that was a big part of my identity and my sense of self-worth. And so if you want to know whether a game can make you cry, I'm here to tell you, yes, it can. But of course it was, it wasn't just sorrow, it was a kind of profound joy that I had, that I had this experience. I mean, how many works of culture do you get to have that kind of long-term experience with, that you share with someone that you love? And so it was this poignant, beautiful moment. And James, and some of you know him, he is extremely good at games. And I think it's partly because he had the advantage of growing up in a household where we played a lot of games, growing up around me and my game designer friends, people like Eric Zimmerman, and he's gone on to become extremely good at playing games. Better than me. He's better than me at playing games. It's something that I do a lot of and I try to get good at. And I have sought advice from him. How do you get so good at a game? And his answer was quite simple. He said, I think to get good at a game, you need to seek out the best players that you can find and play against them and lose. And you just keep doing that over and over and over again, and that's how you get good at a game. And I've realized that that I don't have that. I don't think I have that in me to do. I am too addicted to winning to put myself in that position. Like, he gets frustrated if he's playing a game and doesn't lose often enough, right? Because he feels like he's not learning. And his desire to learn and improve is so much stronger than his desire to win that's frustrating for him. I don't have that. Like, I can force myself into that situation, but it doesn't come naturally to me. And I think that there's something truly admirable about that as a quality of his character, right? It's something that I admire, and I am proud of him. I think that I think one of the lessons you can see a child learn when they first start to play games seriously is the lesson of delayed gratification. And that there's something that it's a connection that is made in the brain where you realize that the suffering that you feel now will be repaid with profit, in the future, and so it's partly what that admirable quality of character is a kind of humility, right? It's a willingness to forego the ego, right? It's to put aside the desire.
And this is what you don't have.
This is precisely what I don't have. My ego is too big and too strong to be able to put it aside and say, well, it's okay to lose over and over again. But David Sirlin writes about this wonderfully. David Sirlin, the game designer and author, has a great book called Playing to Win, in which he touches on many of these qualities and many of these reactions to losing that are typical among people who don't have that quality, right? Which is to say that the game is stupid, or to complain. Often in a serious competitive game, players who don't want to persist and improve the quality of their play will complain about what they see as cheap strategies that beat them. Mm-hmm. Well, of course you beat me. You're just blocking over and over again. I could win that way, but that's a cheap strategy, right? And the way David Sirlin frames this is as a process of discovery. Like, some players are on the mountain where they're climbing upwards, and some players are not. They don't want to be on that mountain. They want to be walking around the base of that mountain. They have no interest in that journey. And so it's something that I've thought about quite a lot. It's not simply an abdication of ego, because of course the journey that you're on is one in which eventually you get better and better at the game. Your ego is coming back to you at a higher level, right? So I think this is part of what when you talk about the fractal nature, right? That's part of what I see it. I would say it's a kind of dialectic of ego destruction, right? That you're sacrificing your ego, but then eventually it's coming back to you at a higher level. And so there's this kind of dialectical process. And finally, I'll just say that my son James now can beat me at basically any game. And there's really only one game that I'm better than him at, which is poker. So poker is another game that I take quite seriously, and I've studied a lot. And it's just something that doesn't interest him. He just never grokked it. And so my experience with poker provides another kind of example of a different sort of ego destruction. Like, if you play poker seriously, you can go through periods of tremendous prolonged suffering. Because you can go through things called downswings. They just happen because of math. And when you're in one, it's indescribably painful. It is, this is something that, again, you have a lot of ego invested in your ability to play well. You are presented with a series of failures that you cannot quite distinguish whether they are simply bad luck or bad play or a combination, but you just know that you are miserable and you want to die. And I've had nights of playing poker for hours and hours and hours where, I'm slightly ashamed to admit, I've had, screaming and just, pain, like tears rolling down my face, and then you end up just like curled up in a fetal ball on the floor in your bed, just like, wanting the darkness to come and just erase you from the world. And you feel like you've just submitted yourself to this humiliating process in which you've been confronted by the indifference, the cold indifference of the universe, right? You've exposed yourself and the universe has just crushed you. God has told you, you are nothing, you are nothing. And I'm not sure if there's something that a dialectical, greater, higher plane on the other side of that. For me, it was a journey down, down to the depths. But there's something about it. Phil Ivey, who's one of the greatest living, if not the greatest living poker player right now, once said in passing, he said, "I like to lose so much that I can't breathe." He said, that's what I'm addicted to, right? And I know what he's talking about, and there's something there that is not simply about a journey up a mountain, but it is about just confronting this suffering that is, in and of itself, sublime. And it's also a ritual that allows you into a place that not many people go, right? And I think that's one key ingredient of failure in games, is that it's something that it's like a scarification almost. It's like you submit yourself to the fire, and a handful of people do it, and then there's this club of people who have done it and are on the other side. And there's something tragic and lonely about that suffering, but it is something that you eventually end up sharing with other people. So those are my thoughts on your wonderful books. What's next?
What's next? All right, so let's see. We have a bet,
That's right.
and so do you want to explain the bet?
Sure. So in the discussions led up to this event, we were talking about different ways of enacting failure. We thought we would play some difficult games, and you could watch us fail. And we also thought it would be fun maybe to have the Rubik's Cube, because the Rubik's Cube is something that's a very popular toy. A lot of people bought it and played with it. And for me, it was just a thing that I had that I could never do. And I thought that was maybe a common thing. So we thought it would be funny to like bring someone up out of the audience, give them a Rubik's Cube, and then watch them try to solve it. And then Doug, I don't know, if at some point you said, "Oh, I'm sure that there's someone there in the audience who could do it." And I said, "Really? I bet there isn't." And he said, "Oh, I bet there is." So we ended up making a wager. So Doug and I have a $5 bet that there's no one in the audience.
Okay,
You confident?
I can totally do it.
Okay, so
I messed it up on purpose. And
so scramble it good. So here's the terms of the bet. What's your name?
I am Michael O'Reilly.
Michael O'Reilly, and you are the creator of.
Oh, I want to be the guy.
I want to be the guy. He's not a plant. You know that? Okay. So the terms are, you get 2 minutes.
Okay, that's about right.
Okay, good. So we still have it's going to be exciting and dramatic. 2 minutes. If he can
hold on.
Don't get started.
No, I just wanted to make sure. It's got to feel good.
So you have 2 minutes, and if he does it, Doug wins, and if he doesn't do it, I win. So
Okay,
root against him.
1, 2, 3, go.
Go. What would be distracting? I don't think we should distract you, but what just so we know what would be distracting, so we don't do it. Tell us. Oh, I can already feel the money in my pocket.
Double the bet.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Frank, should you be interested in losing?
Yeah.
See, this is where I'm at.
Interested in winning.
Exactly.
I want to know if that Rubik's Cube is rigged.
Oh yeah, I'm totally expecting it to be rigged.
No.
No.
It's just
Oh, it's a legit cube.
Oh, he's probably got plenty of time.
Probably.
It's been about, is that a real clock? Is that how time moves? It's so slow.
That second really is
It's been less than half a minute. Oh no.
Yeah, I think like a minute.
Oh no.
No wait, that was a mess.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. So there's one minute. Thank you.
Yeah,
A regular clock.
you were
Yeah.
right in perception.
Ooh. Yeah. It's half as slow as regular time.
Kind of annoying because I'm not. We all feel slightly different. Yeah, I feel bad.
Yes, but I heard that you also once were a master.
It's been a long time.
Oh, this is good.
Were you under 2 minutes?
This is
I
good.
was on it, but it's been like 20 years.
Oh no, you might have it. Shoot up. Oh man, I'm making money, man.
10, 9, 6,
Oh. Right in your face, Doug
Oh
Wilson.
my god.
That's how you do it. That's how you make events. Yeah, it was exciting. Well done, thank you, thank you.
There.
Yeah. Another hand for Michael, yeah. Oh, you almost had me. I know. So good.
Yeah, no, I just totally.
All right, so
Oh, it could not be better, right? That's the best possible outcome for everyone. We got to see him fail. We got to see Doug fail. We got to see me win.
Double or nothing.
I think
Frank, you can finish the cube.
I can. There's no way.
Anybody knows what they're doing can finish that now.
I have no idea.
no. All right, so the next game is so one of the things that Doug likes to talk about is the idea of dialogic design, and I want to show you an example of non-dialogic design. So if you know the history of games, there was a very famous game called Manic Miner, and so this is a cheap knockoff called China Miner, and it has. So one of the things it's famous for is that the only sound is just this music playing over and over and over and over. So
Get in there, Doug.
So let's just try.
I've never played this before.
And this is the first level of this game.
Who am I? Oh,
Lower right.
crap. Well, what are the controls?
All right. So I'll give you a hint. One of the funny things about this game is it's possibly the only game in the world where you have to press up and press the jump button at the same time in order to jump.
We do again. Let me
No, we
do
do
it.
that.
Get that gem.
Can I jump on him?
Sorry?
Can I jump on him?
No. Man, why don't we go for him?
Yeah, let me get it. I'll show you how it's done.
So that's the next thing you learn. These are actually spikes. So it'll kill you.
Okay. I'm just warming up.
Oh, it's okay. And notice this is the only sound. There's no in-game sound. This is also a bit unique. Yeah.
So you go up.
So you're up and button.
Go, what are you doing?
So you go from the minute. Is it?
Go, what are you doing?
Yeah. Just one more. Here we go. What am I doing wrong?
It's taken 5. No!
I just gotta get that jam. One more.
You started.
Oh, sorry.
Here we go.
So,
Yeah, show us how it's done.
oh, sorry. Oh! And also, notice that these are also spikes up here, so you have to time your jump, otherwise you're gonna hit the spike. So let's see, I don't know, this is probably, it's just about as far as ever got. What? Oh, there may be actually something like you have to get the objects before you get the yeah obviously. All right, no, but I think it's kind of interesting because how close it is to Kaiser Mario, but kind of unintended. So the funny thing, like the later levels are actually easier. So it's this kind of complete bundle of a mess, and it's Ian Gray was famous because I think it's like 1984. He actually made like 8 games. So it's probably one of the kind of world records for commercial releases, I think. All right, so we have a next game coming up, but I guess we should start talking a bit or taking questions.
Yeah, while you're setting up, why don't we open it up to the audience and see if there are any comments or questions from the guests? Yes.
Okay, so in terms of design, basically, where do you think the balance of failures and success should fall? Like, in terms of Kaiser Mario, the failure rate is much higher. Do you think it should be closer to the 50-50 or?
I think in a way it's more like that there perhaps are different styles, right? And they're kind of somewhat paradoxical. I also think they kind of seem to change over time, right? So, but also notice that failure and success it's not just a balance going from A to B. So it does seem that over the history of games have started to come with stronger and stronger promises that you will be able to succeed. But it's also in a particular way, right? Because in a way, since game over kind of disappeared in a lot of single-player games, it actually means you can fail a lot. It just doesn't. The cost of failure is just like much smaller. So I think in a way that's how it's been going, and also that it's just that you have different kinds of games. Where you have games where in a way it's interesting because the investment you're wagering every time you're playing is like several hours of intensive play, whereas the game we're going to play next is like several seconds of intensive play. And so in a way, paradoxically also that it seems that in a way to make a game accessible actually is to make it very challenging, right? Because if a game is very challenging, often you'll play for very short periods of time, which means that a lot more people are going to play it on the subway than otherwise. So I think it's just that there's no like one formula. It's more like they kind of go in different ways. And there's something nice about, say, like playing on permadeath, where you have this kind of huge investment that you're going to lose. But it's just a different kind of experience than like the very small kind of sub-second or second time investment.
We talked a lot about. You talked about a lot about failure as a singular theme. What do you think the value is in classifying the different ways in that a person can fail? Like, for example, there's sometimes a failure of the mind. Failure of being able to process information.
Yeah.
Failure of reflexes. Where do you think the value is in classifying that and how that affects the equation?
Well, I mean, so also in the book I talk about a few different things like failing by chance versus failing by skill versus, in a way, failing or not completing a game because you don't put in enough time. I would say in the book I talk about those as kind of different existential implications, right? So it's not nice to be unlucky. It doesn't, because in a way, even if you're not religious, it's still there's this kind of thing about the universe in some weird way not being kind of friendly to you or being in tune with you, even if you're not reading it religiously, right? Whereas skill is much more of a personal thing. And I think, again, it's just perhaps one of those things where it kind of changes over time. So one of the, say, like Blizzard talks about this idea that for something to be good, say, e-sport, you need to have skill differentiation, right? That you just need to have a wide range of skills that you have to combine in order to be good at the game. And so one person might be very good at like long-term strategic thinking, and another might be very good at like the mechanics of just pressing the keyboard. So I think it's kind of hard to exactly classify those in kind of in more detail than say like skill and chance. But it's more, I think it's more like it's perhaps where one of the arts of game design lies, right? This kind of thing. You find new ways of challenging you, and then thereby new ways of failing and new ways of realizing. Oh, you suddenly realize how bad you are about thinking in 4D, for example. There are like recent puzzle games out like that. You never knew you were so bad at it, right? And so in a way, I just do think that's how game history also proceeds. It's also coming up with these new challenges and new ways to fail.
I think it's also worth pointing out that there are kind of conventional design wisdom about making sure that failing is entertaining, right? I'm sure that Ernst Adams would back me up on this, that a lot of really successful games make failure fun. So if you think about The Sims, you can just sort of like explore the theater of failure, right? The theatrical aspect of this exaggerated version of your city being destroyed in SimCity, or your sim dying this horrific death. So that's a whole different avenue to explore as well.
So
So tonight we've only been talking about like one single-player games and playing against a computer, playing against a designer.
Oh.
But there's also the failure of a team.
Yeah,
So
of a
I hate
team,
playing
yeah.
team sports because I feel like I'm letting my team down, which is even worse.
Yeah.
So how does that kind of play into?
Yeah, I mean, so let's talk about the social aspect is pretty important, right? So there's, I do think it's also present even when you play single player games, and even if there's no global high score table, you might still have this idea like if other people are doing better than you are. So I do think that kind of extends, but of course if you're playing on a team, it's just kind of much more kind of in your face, and that's this kind of social thing. Yeah. So. Yeah, no, exactly. I remember like a few years ago, some friends of mine started playing soccer at on a kind of regular basis, and I was, and it turned out that they actually had this kind of idea that you should actually be really into it, right? So there was this kind of disagreement on the team whether it was more like a kind of relaxed thing you do every Saturday, or whether you kind of really have to get into it, and so you get all these kind of problems. I would just say in a way it's just. I agree in a way like losing on a team is the worst, right? Because you're a bad friend, right?
If I'm bad at playing chess against you, then at least you're happy.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe
Yeah,
the
exactly.
positive of the world is actually better off. I don't care that much.
But trust me, the other team is very happy that you screwed up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no, they are.
Right? So
I think it's, I actually, I want to follow up on that. I think it's worth pointing out that arguably the most popular game in the world right now is a game that is extraordinarily hard, and is a game of, there's no way to play it without failing, without just confronting failure, and it's a team-based game. There is no single-player version of it. It's League of Legends, right? And the only thing you can do is blunder into this social space in which not only are you failing over and over again, but you're doing it publicly, and you're letting down these strangers on the internet who hate you. It's just this horrible experience of ritualized failure, but it's the most popular game in the world, so it's quite interesting.
So I actually want to just play a few rounds of Super Hexagon here.
Yeah, should we
And
invite
so
someone?
does somebody know how far the range is of these things? Did anybody ever test this out?
I would estimate 10 feet.
Yeah. So I was about to suggest that what we do is that we.
Yes.
Game over.
And so I was about to suggest we try to passing it around a bit.
There you go. Andy Nealon, ladies and gentlemen.
So yeah, press A to.
Game
I just pass it on, yeah. That's just one.
I thought you were good at this one.
begin. Game over. Begin.
Pass it on. I won. Pass it on.
Yeah.
Game over.
Wow.
Yeah, you
Go,
got it.
come on,
Go.
You can't
I'll go for the
refuse.
shortest time possible.
It gets so ridiculous.
Begin. Game over.
Nicely done, Eric.
Hold on.
Oh,
Begin. Game over.
pass it on.
Begin. Game over. Begin. Game over.
Eric.
Yeah, kind of nice inside.
Begin. Game over.
Eric Zimmerman, ladies and gentlemen.